Hello and welcome back to the Center for Critical and Cultural Theory. My name is Dr. Roger Green. This is a contextualized reading of Homer's Odyssey, Book 19, Penelope and Her Guest, for our ongoing class titled Homer and the Critique of Western Civilization. And so we left the end of Book 18 with the suitors retiring for the night. And Odysseus is here in the hall. We know that Odysseus is meant to visit Penelope later on in the night. But first, there's this discussion about storing weapons, which we've already heard about. Odysseus tells Telemachus to store the weapons so that when they unleash their rage on the suitors won't be able to grab their weapons. And Telemachus does what his father says, and then he calls out to the nurse, Eurycleia. He says, "Quick, dear one, close the women up in their own quarters till I can stow my father's weapons in the storeroom. Splendid gear lying about, neglected, black with soot, since father sailed away. I was only a boy then, now I must safeguard them from the smoke." So this is kind of a ruse, right? So that none of the serving women let the suitors know what has happened. And she says, "High time, child. If you'd bothered to tend your whole house and safeguard all your treasures. Tell me who's to fetch and carry the torch for you. You won't let the maids who'd light your way." And that's where he says, our friend will, and that's how he gets Odysseus to help him as well. And then they go down to put the weapons away, and Athena shows up and she lights the way of the passage, and this sets Telemachus into a sense of amazement and wonder. And his father says, "Quiet, get a grip on yourself. No more questions now. It's just the way of the gods who rule Olympus. Off you go to bed. I'll stay here behind to test the women. Test your mother too." So there's that testing theme showing up. "She in her grief will ask me everything I know." And so Telemachus goes away, and Penelope comes down from her chamber, looking for all the world like Artemis or golden Aphrodite. Close to the fire her women drew her favorite chair with its whorls of silver and ivory inlaid rings. The craftsman who'd made it years ago, Icmalius, added to the footrest under the seal itself, added a footrest under the seal itself, mortised to the frame, and over it was draped a heavy fleece. Here Penelope took her place, discreet, observant. The women, bare arms, pressing in from their quarters, cleared away the tables and the heaped remains of the feast, and the cups from which the raucous lords had drunk. Raking embers from the braziers onto the ground, they piled them high again with seasoned wood, providing light and warmth. And so we get a glimpse here of women's work in the ancient world here. They come and clean up after the men, and then they set things right for the morning. We also get a glimpse at Penelope's elegance as well. And then Melantho, one of the women, berates Odysseus again. So she's done this before, and is then rebuked by first Odysseus, who warns Melantho about what will happen to people who weren't loyal to Odysseus and Telemachus. And then Penelope rebukes Melantho as well and sends her off packing to bed. Eurynome shows up, another servant, and Penelope says, "Now bring us a chair and spread it soft with fleece so our guest can sit and tell me his whole story and hear me out as well. I'd like to ask him questions point by point." Eurynome bustled off to fetch a polished chair and set it down, spread it soft with a fleece. Here Odysseus sat, the man of many trials. Penelope starts with the questionings. "Stranger, let me start our questioning myself. Who are you? Where are you from? Your city, your parents?" And Odysseus launches into his false story again. But we get these little moments that are quite nice. At the end of the passage, he says, "I'm a man who's had his share of sorrows. It's wrong for me in someone else's house to sit here moaning and groaning, sobbing so. It makes things worse, the grieving on and on. One of your maids or you yourself might scold me, think that it's just the wine that has doused my wits and made me drown my tears." And Penelope says, "No. And she jumps in. So first of all, she says, "Odysseus, if he could return and tend my life, to tend my life, the renown I had when I only grow in glory. Now my life is torment." And she launches in and gives a recount of her trials. She recounts the loom again and how she gets caught in the act of trying to stave off the suitors. And so then Odysseus launches in and tells his false story. But we get a name this time. He says, "My own name is Aethon. I'm the younger born. My older brother's a better man than I. Now, it was there in Knossos that I saw him, Odysseus, and we traded gifts of friendship. A heavy gale had landed on him on the coast, driven him way off course, rounding Malaya's Cape, when he was bound for Troy." And then he says a little bit further down, "I took Odysseus back to my own house, gave him a hero's welcome, treated him in style, stores and our palace made for princely entertainment for his comrades." And she's telling this story, and what we notice here is, just like with the Phaeacians a few books ago, Penelope gets caught up in Odysseus's storytelling. So Homer tells us, "Falsehoods all, but he gave his falsehoods all a ring of truth." As she listened on, her tears flowed and soaked her cheeks as the heavy snow melts down from the high mountain ridges. Snow the west wind piles there, and the warm east wind thaws, and the snow, melting, swells the rivers to overflow their banks. So she dissolved in tears, streaming down her lovely cheeks, weeping for him, her husband, sitting there beside her. A wonderful image, one of the many wonderful similes throughout the text. And then, interestingly, Penelope asks Odysseus what Odysseus was wearing, and so she's testing him, and Odysseus gives us an image of himself, what he was wearing, and Penelope recognizes the clothing that Odysseus describes as clothing that she herself packed for Odysseus before he left. And then she says this a couple of times in the Fagel's translation as she's going on. "A black day it was when he took his ship to that cursed city. Destroy, I called it." So it's Troy, but she says destroy, I called it. I hate to say its name. And then Odysseus tells her that he's heard that Odysseus is alive and that Odysseus is coming home. And we get this exchange back and forth that we've seen throughout the text, where somebody says something like that, and then the counter is disbelief. And that's exactly what happens with Penelope's first response. "If only, my friend," she says, "everything you say would come to pass. You'd know my affection, know my gifts. Any man you meet would call you blessed, but my heart can sense the way it will all go. Odysseus, I tell you, is never coming back, nor will you ever gain your passage home, for we have no masters in our house like him at welcoming in or sending off an honored guest. Odysseus, there was a man, or was he all a dream? But come, women, wash the stranger and make his bed, with bedding, blankets, and lustrous spreads to keep him warm till dawn comes up. And so Odysseus is being associated here with the master of hosts, right? That it's not only that he's not coming home, but that there's nobody there capable of hosting this stranger and putting things right for the stranger here in the house. So she offers him bedding, she offers him clothes. And then we get this nice commentary from Penelope on life itself. Our lives are much too brief. If a man is cruel by nature, cruel in action, the mortal world will call down curses on his head while he is alive, and all will mock his memory after death. But then if a man is kind by nature, kind in action, his guests will carry his fame across the earth, and people will praise him from the heart. And so we get, again, this has been a theme throughout the text, that when one dies, it's their fame, it's their memory that endures throughout the generations. And Odysseus politely refuses, of course, to accept the clothing, and the bedding would put him into a situation where somebody might recognize him. So he politely refuses, and he says he doesn't need any new clothes or anything, but he said he will accept being washed, but only if it's by somebody who's old. He says, of all the women who serve your household here, not one will touch my feet, unless perhaps there's some old retainer, the soul of trust, someone who's borne as much as I have borne. I wouldn't mind it if she would touch my feet. And Penelope is charmed by this, by his humility, and calls Eurycleia in to wash Odysseus's feet. And then we get an image of Eurycleia. She's shown up throughout the text. She is kind of the female counterpart in some ways, I think, to Eumaeus, who is the trusted elder servant who loves their master as well. And so Eurycleia comes in and she says, "Oh, my child, how helpless I am to help you now. How Zeus despised you more than all other men, God-fearing man that you were. Never did any mortal burn the old thunderer, such rich thigh bones, offering charred and choice. Never as many as you did, praying always to reach the ripe old age and raise the sun to glory. Now you're alone. He's robbed you of your homecoming day." So here she is pining after Odysseus, right? And then, but it's Odysseus who's in front of her. And then she says, "I'll wash your feet, both for my dear queen and for yourself. Your sorrows wring my heart. And why? Listen to me closely. Mark my words. Many a wayworn guest has landed here, but never, I swear, has one so struck my eyes. Your build, your face, your feet, you're like Odysseus to the life." And Odysseus counters, "Old woman, that's what they all say who've seen us both. We bear a striking resemblance to each other, as you have had the wit to say yourself." But of course, she's the one who nursed Odysseus as a child. And so there's already this moment of partial recognition going on from Eurycleia. And then Odysseus realizes that Eurycleia is going to see this scar and really recognize him. And so she bends in, and the narrative has this nice break in it. Bending in closer, she started to bathe her master. Then, in a flash, she knew the scar. And then we get the story of the scar. And with the story of the scar, we also get Odysseus's actual name. The naming comes from his grandfather, who said when he was young, So let his name be Odysseus, the son of pain, a name he'll earn in full. And when he is come of age and pays his visit to Parnassus, the great estate of his mother's line, where all my treasures lie, I will give him enough to cheer his heart, then speed him home to you. So his grandfather has come when he's a baby and has told his parents what to name him. And then we get the story of him going later and visiting his grandparents' house, where on a hunting expedition, he confronts a boar as a child, and the boar runs at him and hits him with his horn, scars his leg, but not quite to the bone. But Odysseus, on the way, spears the boar and kills it. And so all of this like brief interruption happens in the moment of Euryclea recognizing Odysseus. So around lines 528, that scar as the old nurse cradled his leg and her hands passed, she felt it, knew it, suddenly let his foot fall. Down it dropped into the basin. The bronze clanged, tipping over, spilling water across the floor. The great image there. Joy and the torment gripped her heart at once. Tears rushed to her eyes. Voice choked in her throat. She reached for Odysseus's chin and whispered quickly, "Yes, yes, you are Odysseus. Oh, dear boy, I couldn't know you before, not till I touched the body of my king." Now, this kind of moment of being, she's obviously bent before the king as well. It's an ancient posture as well. And it would be close to the posture that sometimes people would take when they were taking an oath. They would actually grab the king's penis or private parts, or grab them, I guess, but the scrotum. And that's how they would make an oath being sworn. And so there's a real, I point that out to sort of really show how intimate this particular moment is here. And Odysseus's response is very, very harsh, I think. But Odysseus, his right hand shot out, clutching the nurse's throat with his left. He hugged her into himself and muttered, "Nurse, you want to kill me? You suckled me yourself at your own breast. And now that I'm home at last, after bearing 20 years of brutal hardship, home on native ground. But now you know, now that a god has flashed it in your mind, quiet. Not a word to anyone in the house, or else I warn you, and I mean business too, if a god beats down these brazen suitors at my hands, I will not spare you, my old nurse that you are, when I kill the other women in my house." Pretty harsh when you think about it. But she responds back in this great way. She says, "Child, what nonsense you let slip through your teeth. You know me. I'm stubborn, never give an inch. I'll keep still, as solid as rock or iron." And she says, "I'll report in full on which women of the house have been true or loyal, and who's been disloyal." Odysseus kind of, so it's this nice like just shooting right back and with intensity to the threat on her own life, right? And then Odysseus says, "Oh yeah, I'll observe them. I'll judge them myself." But she's hushed, and so she goes on. And then Penelope turns to the conversation after Euryclea has left the room to get a new basin because the one's been tipped over. And Penelope says, "My friend, I have only one more question for you, something slight. Now the hour draws for welcome sleep, for those who can yield to sweet repose, that is, heartsick as they are. As for myself, though, some god has sent me pain that knows no bounds. All day long I indulge myself in sighs and tears, as I see to my tasks direct the women of the household. When the night falls and the world lies lost in sleep, I take to my bed, my heart throbbing, about to break. Anxiety is swarming, and we get this beautiful image and story of the nightingale embedded into Penelope talking about her trials. She says, I may go mad with grief, like Pandarius's daughter, the nightingale in the green woods, lifting her lovely song at the first warm rush of the spring, perched in the treetops, rustling leaves, and pouring forth her music, shifting, trilling, and sinking, rippling high to burst in grief for Aeolus, her beloved boy, King Zethus' son, whom she in innocence once cut down with bronze. So my wavering heart goes shuttling back and forth. Do I stay beside my son and keep all things secure, my lands, my serving women, the grand high-roofed house, true to my husband's bed, the people's voice as well? Or do I follow, alas, the best man who courts me here in the halls, who gives me the greatest gifts? My son, when he was a boy and light-hearted, urged me not to marry and to leave my husband's house, and not to leave my husband's house. But now that he's grown and reached his young prime, he begs me to leave our palace, travel home. Telemachus, so obsessed with his own estate, the wealth my princely suitors bleed away. And so we see, just to be very clear here, part of this, the whole framing of the text of the Odyssey begins with Telemachus seeking out his father, right? Because he can't receive his estate until he finds out what has happened to his father. And now we see that even if Penelope were to remarry, that Penelope would then go to the man's house, and the rest of what remains in the estate would go to Telemachus from Odysseus's estate. And that's why the suitors have been bleeding the estate dry. It's this direct affront not only to Odysseus, but to Telemachus and his inheritance. And then Penelope shifts and she asks Odysseus to help her interpret this dream that she had, where a hook-beaked eagle drops down and slays all of the geese that she has been harboring, and then reappears and says that the eagle is her husband returned, and that when so I am your husband, just to quote here, I was once the eagle, but now I am your husband, back again at last, about to launch a terrible fate against them all. So he vowed, and this is in the dream still, right? And the soothing sleep released me. I peered around, though, and I saw my geese everywhere, pecking at their wheat at the same trough where they always took their meal. And Odysseus says, well, dear woman, this is like, what could this be except for the portent that your husband is coming home and that he's going to slay all the suitors, just like the dream said. And Penelope kind of pushes back on him more gently this time, not just complete disbelief, but she says, ah, my friend, dreams are hard to unravel, wayward drifting things. Not all we glimpse in them will come to pass. 2 gates there are for our evanescent dreams. One is made of ivory and the other made of horn. Those that pass through the ivory cleanly carved are will-o'-the-wisps. Their message bears no fruit. The dreams that pass through the gates of polished horn are fraught with truth for the dreamer who can see them. But I can't believe my strange dream has come that way, much as my son and I would like to have it this way. And then she says she's going to set up a contest the next day, a contest of axes. And it's going to harken back to something that Odysseus used to do, where you throw these axes and then shoot an arrow straight through them. And she's basically going to say that the person who can string Odysseus's bow with the most ease of the suitors is going to be the one that she will choose. Now, this, of course, pleases Odysseus because Odysseus knows that he's the one who can do it. So he praises her for this idea of the contest. And then she goes off to bed. But again, she repeats that word destroy. That's the way that she refers to the city of Troy. One last thing, so that ends out this book. But one last thing, just because it's going to show up in the next book as well, is this intense attention that Homer is paying attention to that nightingale story as one of Pandarius's daughters, who are all whisked away by Zeus to become the handmaidens of the Furies. So I just wanted to plant that in your mind, so that when you so that you pay attention to the way that it shows up in the next book as well. That takes us to the end of book 19. And so I'll stop there. If you are enjoying these, as always, please feel free to support us on Patreon. We'll keep going regardless. So have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. Bye.